Will Ryan turn his dad into the police? Why didn't Catherine say I love you too? Will Faisal or Rob be arrested for Joe's murder? We'll be discussing these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This video will be taking a look at the 5th episode of Series 3 of Happy Valley. The BBC iPlayer summarises this episode by saying, Catherine races to protect her family as a murder investigation begins, which doesn't even scratch the surface of what happened in this episode. I'll tell you more in my full recap. Let's jump straight in. The episode starts with Catherine in Mike Taylor's office, getting a dressing down for the alien life form liaison officer prank from the 3rd episode. PC to Kelly has filed a complaint against Catherine for reading out the notice and Shaft for organising the stunt. The argument is heated, but the really worrying thing is Mike Taylor signed to Kelly's application and sent it off without reading it, so he's been made to look a fool. The conversation is cut short by the news that Joanna Hepworth's body has been found. Catherine is sent to secure the crime scene. On her way to the Hepworth house, Catherine gets a call from Richard to fill her in on the events from the courtroom at the end of the last episode. While Richard is talking to Catherine, Ryan spots that Mateo is waiting on the platform for the train back to Hebden Bridge, and recognises him as one of the troublemakers from the waiting area of the courtroom. Then we hear Mateo talking on the phone to Ivan, and his friend is trying to talk him into digging up their backpacks full of stolen Knezevich money that they buried in the allotments in the last episode. Ivan thinks they've earned the money after all the dirty work they've done for their bosses, not to mention the beating that he suffered in the last episode, but Mateo is worried about them getting caught with so much cash that doesn't belong to them. There's also another mention of Ivan's wedding, which has been referenced in each of the last 4 episodes now, so surely it's going to play a part in the final episode. Richard and Ryan take pictures of Mateo on the train platform with all the subtlety of a hippo in Doc Martens, and it's no surprise whatsoever when the googly-eyed henchman spots them. Luckily his fight-or-flight instinct is set to run and he scarpers. Despite not being on speaking terms with her sister Claire, Catherine still has to call her to tell her about Tommy Lee Royce's escape, as they're all in danger now. She tells Claire that her and Neil might be used by Tommy to get to Ryan, so she can't go home and instead has to find somewhere else to live until Tommy has been caught. Catherine catches up with PC to Kelly outside the Hepworth house and confronts him about his complaint. She points out how damaging his complaint can be to Shaft as he starts out as a sergeant, and how much Shaft supported him at the start of his career, before calling him an idiot. Gorkum doesn't like being spoken to so bluntly and goes to complain to the detective superintendent, but loses his nerve and instead goes back to setting up the cordon. Then we see Tommy Lee Royce enjoying the beautiful Yorkshire landscape as he cycles up the Pennine Hills. He must have kept himself in good shape in prison to be able to manage a lengthy ride, though as he stops to admire the view, an unmarked van picks him and his bike up and takes him away. The driver of the van is Darius Knezevich, dressing more casual than he was in the last episode. He's pleased to see Tommy and talks him through the next phase of the plan. He's going to put Tommy in a safe house for the next few days while he lies low and lets the heat settle. Then he will smuggle him out of the country and get him and Ryan to Marbella where they will start a new life. Darius drops Tommy at the safe house and they have a difficult conversation about Tommy's plans to get revenge on Catherine. Darius tries to talk Tommy out of his plan, but Tommy says no to calling it off and won't budge. Then Tommy tries to get Darius to give him a gun and Darius says no and won't budge. It's interesting as both men are alpha males and aren't used to being told no, but they reach a standoff with each other and have to back down. Tommy then goes to get settled in his safe house and it's nowhere near as nice as Darius made it sound on the van ride over. Darius is clearly going to be a natural politician with his ability to make big promises and deliver poor results. The old man that lives in the house Tommy is staying in barely speaks, and the rundown house is clearly a disappointment. But I suppose anywhere is better than prison, and he's got beer, tobacco and an old video game system to keep him entertained. Tommy tells the old man that he needs to buy him a phone, but the old man ignores his request and continues chopping his beetroot. Tommy becomes quite insistent that he wants the old guy to get him a phone, but the old man won't be ordered around. He tells Tommy that he'll buy him a phone the next day and gives him what Paddington Bear would refer to as a hard stare. There's something about this old man that makes me think he's not to be messed with. The way he was holding the knife when he was chopping the beetroot, his steely eyes, him not backing down to Tommy, or even acknowledging him when he was on the doorstep. It wouldn't stun me if he was an elderly relative of the Knezevich brothers, or maybe the real power in the family. Then we meet Richard's wife Ros for the first time in a long while, as she pours herself a healthy-sized glass of wine and shows an open disdain for her husband. She's even less impressed when she finds out that Richard has brought Ryan back to hide him from Tommy Lee Royce, and is now going to leave for an interview with Darius Knezevich. Ryan's equally unimpressed about being left alone with his boozy step-grandmother, who makes no secret of the fact she doesn't like him very much. Richard goes to his meeting anyway, despite the fact his grandson is most likely being hunted by an escaped murderer, and the person he's leaving him with is a hopeless drunk. Faisal arrives home to find his wife and 2 daughters staring out of their window at all the police activity down at the Hepworth house. Faisal gets very nervous when his wife suggests he speaks to the police about his confrontation with Rob that morning when they had a minor car accident. The last thing he wants to do is make himself known to the police investigating Joe's death, as he will be hoping that there's nothing linking him to the murder. Richard turns up for his interview with Darius Knezevich, but when he gets there he receives a message to say that it's been cancelled. It's not yet clear whether Knezevich knows about Richard's connection to Ryan and Catherine or not. It may be he cancelled the meeting because he was too busy dealing with Tommy Lee Royce's escape plan, or it could be he never intended on meeting a meddling journalist. I'm still very concerned about Richard, as he seems to be in way over his head with this story. Richard then checks in on Ros, who is demolishing another substantial glass of wine. While she was paying close attention to a wine glass, unfortunately she wasn't paying enough attention to Ryan, as he's left and isn't answering his phone. This obviously causes a lot of panic, and Catherine puts out a message on her police walkie-talkie to say he's gone missing. Are they called APBs? I think they might be. The panic doesn't last for long though, as a soggy Ryan turns up at Daniel and Anne's house, asking if he can stay with them for a while. Anne is clearly struggling with the news that Tommy Lee Royce has escaped, and tells Ryan a little bit about what he did to both her and his mother, including the details of his crimes that led to his mother's death. Anne tells Ryan the uncomfortable truth about his personal history, that the rest of the family have danced around for far too long. He had a right to know all the things that she tells him, but Anne is too brutal in the way that she delivers the information and doesn't consider the damage she might do to a boy that's only just turned 16. She tells him how Catherine was the only person that wanted him, how nobody else in the family wanted to keep him around because he was the child of the man that had done such despicable things to Ryan's mother. It's not clear how much of Anne's monologue has gone in with Ryan, when his response is that he'll just go sleep in a ditch, as it seems like a typical sulky teenager thing to say. But it must have made an impact, as he says to Daniel that he wasn't surprised that everyone hated him. Daniel clarifies that people don't hate him, it was just the circumstances surrounding his birth that they hated, which, if I was in Ryan's shoes, I'm not sure I'd feel all that reassured by Daniel's words. Ryan tells Catherine that he loves her when he sees her next. She brushes aside the remark, and they head inside to Neveson Gallagher's house, where they're hiding with Claire and Neil until Royce is caught. Inside Neveson's house, Catherine and Claire have a catch-up, but it isn't the friendly reunion Claire was hoping for. She tries to chat with Catherine, but gets back a load of the most hurtful abuse from her sister, like Catherine is trying to say the most awful things that she can. It's uncomfortable to watch, and it's hard to see how the relationship can come back after such harsh words have been said. Rob Hepworth has been released by the police, so he goes to see his mum, who's been looking after his children. His mother says that she won't ask him if he did it, but from the way that she says it, she gives the impression that she thinks he murdered Joe. Rob goes to see his daughters and gets a big hug from the older one, but the younger one, Poppy, glares at him in a way that she has done all the way through the season. It's like she knows something about him, and he seems really uncomfortable whenever she stares at him. Couple these looks with the fact that she never takes her coat off, and it seems reasonable to wonder if Rob has been abusing more people in the house than just his wife. As you know, he's been controlling the diet of the children with the padlock on the fridge. The detectives discuss Joanna Hepworth's murder, and all the evidence is pointing to Rob. There's evidence of blood splattered all over the house, most likely from the times he's beaten her rather than from her death. Even though it seems like an open and shut case, they still want to identify who supplied Joe with the painkillers Catherine took off her in episode 1, which is terrible news for Faisal, as those pills were in blister packs that can be traced back to his pharmacy. While Faisal is flossing, he finds himself haunted by flashbacks of the murder and cleanup of Joe's body. I had a little chuckle at the flashback of him struggling to pull the suitcase with the body into the garage, as one of the last things he said to Joe before he killed her was how he was stronger than he looked. Joe was right to be suspicious of this claim based on this evidence. Next we see Tommy is playing a very old-looking video game in his safe house, with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Even though you can't smell things through TV, I just know this blanket smells of damp just by looking at it. After he finishes his game, Royce switches to chat and types in Ryan's username. He sends him a message, and after some father-son tech support, they manage to connect through voice chat. The conversation between the two of them is very guarded, as neither is willing to share their location, and they clearly don't entirely trust each other. Tommy checks more than once that Ryan is on his own, and that he's not lying to his dad, and Ryan is suspicious about how his dad knew his gamer tag, despite the fact he'd previously told him on one of his visits. The conversation is difficult between father and son, as neither seems to be on the same wavelength. Tommy wants Ryan to be impressed by his daring courtroom escape, and Ryan wants to be reassured that his father isn't armed and dangerous. Neither gets what they want from the other. Tommy then shares his plan to go abroad and start a new life and explains how he wants Ryan to come with him. Ryan dismisses the suggestion initially because he's got upcoming GCSEs and plans to get an apprenticeship, but Tommy's offer of a new life in Marbella is obviously tempting to Ryan. Tommy tells him to dwell on it and be ready to go on Monday if he decides he wants to go. Ryan agrees to think about it, and Tommy ends the call by telling him that he loves him, something that makes Ryan pause, but it's not clear why. They agree to talk again the next day, and the credits roll. I really enjoyed this episode of Happy Valley. While it wasn't as action-packed as last week, I actually enjoyed it more because there were so many dramatic moments. You can maybe argue that most of the episode was lining up the pieces for the finale, but there was still plenty to enjoy in this episode too. As we're nearing the end of the series, with just one episode left, there are an awful lot of storylines still to tie up, and every character seems to have a lot of loose ends to address in that single episode. I'm glad that it's going to be a bumper 70-minute finale, but even that doesn't feel like it will be long enough to have a satisfying send-off for all the characters and their stories. Here's a breakdown of where all the main characters are at this point. Given this episode ended later on the same day as episode 4, Catherine is still on the verge of retirement, but now she's facing a complaint about bullying from a colleague as a final send-off. She's also further burned her bridges with her sister Claire after saying some pretty horrendous things to her. Then the biggest change for her is that she's effectively a fugitive, banned from visiting her own home and hiding out at Neverson Gallagher's with the rest of her family, even though she's still furious with them for the trips to see Tommy in prison. Ryan finds himself at a crossroads. Tommy has made contact with him through his console chat system and intends to do the same the next night. The right thing to do would be to report that straight away, but does he really want to do that? Ryan started off asking Tommy what he was going to do, but as the conversation went on, he then asked what we are going to do. This subtle change in language suggests he actually might be thinking about going off with his dad. He's at a low point in terms of the relationship with the rest of his family, so the timing of Tommy's offer to go abroad and start a new life couldn't come at a more tempting time. Particularly when Catherine has said she intends to go off driving around the Himalayas soon, and he'll need to find somewhere else to stay anyway. Claire and Neil are hiding out at Neverson's, but they're also on a list of suspects too. Because they visited Tommy Lee Royce in prison, they're also suspected of helping his escape. I'm still not convinced Neil isn't a bit dodgy, so maybe this investigation could turn something up about him. Richie continues to blunder around the Knezovich's business and insists he knows what he's doing, despite all evidence pointing the other way. If he survives the next episode, he's done very well. If he also manages to write an article that exposes the organised crime in West Yorkshire, I'll be even more impressed. Tommy Lee Royce is now out of prison, but he's not much better off in the squalid safe house that Darius Knezovich has put him up in. We know he's also going to try and get some revenge in the next few days, and then he'll be sneaking out of the country to try and start a new life in Marbella, hopefully with Ryan. Darius Knezovich's motivation for helping Tommy after his escape from prison is a little bit puzzling. It made sense to do a deal with him to stop him from naming him in connection with the Gary Gagovsky murder when he was inside prison, but now that Tommy is out, it will make more sense, from the logic of a criminal, to kill him and have him out of the way. When the two men disagreed about killing the policewoman, it seemed to me like Darius realised that Tommy is a liability, and it might be that he decides to do some risk management in the next episode. Another thought I've had about Darius Knezovich is whether he really does want to be a legitimate businessman and politician. He was weeing on his underlings in the last episode, and personally got involved in a jailbreak in this one. He's not exactly giving off the same vibes as Michael Corleone in Godfather Part 2, who was desperate to make the family business legitimate within 5 years. Darius Knezovich is more like Tony Montana in the later scenes of Scarface, too attached to the gangster life and the trappings that come with it. It was a disappointing episode for fans of the henchmen Ivan and Mateo, who barely featured more than a few seconds. The bad news for them is that the organised crime detectives are onto them after Catherine passed on their number plate for their car and told them about their involvement at the courts and how they were lurking outside Josip's house when he was arrested. The chances of Ivan getting to his wedding unscathed continue to look slim. Rob Hepworth had a rough time in this episode too, with everyone assuming that he murdered his wife Joanna, including his own mother. While we know that he didn't actually do it, we also know that he's a terrible person that does deserve some kind of punishment for all the abuse he's put his family through. So while it would be wrong for him to be convicted for the murder of his wife, it would also be wrong if he didn't face some form of punishment, which is the other possibility, as Joe's death means he's very unlikely to face justice for the terrible things he did to her. Faisal has a nervous time ahead of him too, as he continues to be haunted by the murder of Joe. He may think he's done a good job of cleaning up the crime scene and hasn't left any evidence behind, but with modern forensics it's unlikely that there wouldn't be some form of clothing fibres or DNA left all over the place. And that's before you consider the blister pack for the pills that Joe had taken off her, that link Faisal to her. It's also worth remembering that Faisal's in trouble with the criminal gang as well as the law. Mateo and Ivan expect him to keep paying them large cash payments at regular intervals out of the dodgy deals he does through his pharmacy. We've heard nothing about this for a few episodes, but they may well come back asking for more money in the finale. My favourite line in this episode was Catherine's when she asked Ryan what brought that on when he told her that he loved her. It was both funny and heartbreaking at the same time, which I think is true of a lot of Sally Wainwright's writing. She can find humour in the middle of the most emotional scenes. Ryan was laying his feelings on the line and telling his granny that he loved her after Anna had explained how she'd been the only one to look out for him when he was a baby, but Catherine isn't in a place where she can respond properly to such emotional overtures and dismisses it with a silly comment. This response may prove to be very significant, because Ryan obviously needed Catherine to respond by saying she loved him too, and she didn't. At the end of the episode, his father, without prompting, tells him that he loves him. Anne Gallagher has told him earlier that Tommy can't feel love, and he only uses other people's love as a means to exploit them. But all the same, I think Ryan might still have liked being told that he was loved. Ryan may feel happy that his father told him that he loves him, and upset that his granny didn't respond to his declaration of love. There's more to it than that. Actions mean more than words, and Catherine has shown her love with the care that she's given him over the course of his life, and that kind of love often can't be expressed in words, but it's still something that you can feel. Whereas Tommy Lee Royce barely knows his son, having only spent a handful of afternoons with him, and probably doesn't even have a capacity to feel love. How on earth did Ivan and Mateo escape the courtroom in the last episode? They were both grappling with security guards in the courts when we last saw them, but somehow they managed to break free and make it to the bus and train station without the help of an outfit change at Rico's newsagent. I thought the scenes of Tommy Lee Royce on his bike in the Pennines could be used for the next campaign for the Yorkshire Tourist Board. The beautiful scenery and open road looked absolutely amazing. There's a reason they call it God's own country. There is some disagreement about the reservoir that Tommy Lee Royce cycles up to. The Guardian Recap blog says it's Widdop Reservoir, which is 31.2 miles from Leeds Crown Court, and the Yorkshire Live website says it's Warley Moor Reservoir, which is 27.3 miles from the court. Either way, Tommy has had over 3 hours of cycling, mostly uphill, before he gets picked up. On Twitter, someone mocked up a GoFundMe for Tommy Lee Royce's sponsored cycle trip from the court to his safe house. What really impressed me about this was that it was up within 10 minutes of the episode ending. Darius and Tommy only refer to the policewoman, not Catherine by name, when they talk about his bit of business. While we know that he's got a long-standing feud with Catherine, he could also mean Anne Gallagher. It's most likely Catherine that he's going to go after, but it could be that he still holds a grudge against Anne Gallagher too after he kidnapped her in the first season. If Ryan tells the police about Tommy's conversation with him on their consoles, then they'll most likely be able to track him through the IP address of the game system. While a VPN would protect his location, it seems unlikely that the old guy he's living with would have a setup of that kind. The game they were playing on their system was Unreal Tournament, according to commenters on the Happy Valley subreddit. The game is 20 years old. Presumably modern games would be too expensive to get the rights to show on screen. For the same reason, Ryan talks about his game system when real people would obviously say something like a PlayStation or an Xbox. Catherine calls Roz an empty-headed Nunu, which is possibly a reference to the Hoover from the Teletubbies. It's a good insult, as the Hoover has a drinking problem just like Roz, only the Nunu guzzles down tubby custard rather than white wine. Tommy Lee Royce's gamertag is Glavnikahar06, which Google Translate says is Slovenian for Chef 06. Obviously we saw Royce as a chef in an earlier episode when he was in prison, and the 06 bit may just relate to the year he set up his account. There's so much to cram into the finale, it feels hard to imagine how it's going to feel like a satisfying end to the series. But we know the next one will be the very last episode of Happy Valley. Here are some of the questions I hope we get answered. Will Ryan turn on his father and report him to the police, making good on his promise of revenge being a dish best served cold from earlier in the season? Will Catherine patch things up with her sister after their huge fallout? Will Catherine's leaving do be able to go ahead now she's having to hide from Tommy Lee Royce? Will Richard's investigation of the Knezeviches go anywhere? Can Tommy Lee Royce hunt down Catherine without being caught? Does the fire on the poster for this season offer us a clue to the final episode? Could that be Nevison Gallagher's house going up in flames? Will Faisal or Rob be charged for Joanna's death? And, most importantly to me, will Ivan make it to his wedding? Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this recap and review of Season 3, Episode 5 of Happy Valley. I'll be back with a video for the finale in a few days' time. Please make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss it. Goodbye.